Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Hormones podcast. I'm so stoked to have you here today listening again because I do have Nina here today, which is going to be an awesome topic. Now, some of you guys may have come across, I'm going to say Nina, but we often say naturally Nina, who is an accredited nutritionist and sports nutritionist, as well as a CrossFit trainer and specialising in sport and performance nutrition, disordered eating, and what I really love is also plant-based diets. So she developed a passion for nutrition after being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and struggling with an eating disorder throughout high school, and has now been working, oh, there you go, you've told me here anyway, in private practice for just over 5 years, seeing clients one-on-one worldwide, both online and face-to-face, which is amazing. Her aim as a nutritionist and coach is to educate, support, empower her clients and audience on social media, which you've done really well in, and in learning to fuel their bodies, optimize their performance, both in sport and everyday life. So thank you so much for jumping on here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I just feel like you bring such a wealth of knowledge to the table in this space. Like, you're so young, you've been through so much, you've built this business, but also I guess your diversity of knowledge in building something around sports performance and a plant-based diet is awesome, because there is so much mixed information out there, and then especially when it comes to plant-based eating as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And thank you. That's very kind of you. I'm flattered. But yeah, you're right. Like social media, I feel like social media in general, like it's just a mixed bag of misinformation and, people making claims that they shouldn't be. And it's a confusing space for people.
Yeah. And then also, like, when I think of the plant-based stuff, I just think of how much negative talk is around, because to be fair, like every space, there's so much crap food in the market, right? Like, it's like someone going carnivore and just eating like shitty mince every day. And you kind of like, that is not actually what it's designed for. It's to go eat organ meats, or doing AIP diet, like an autoimmune type diet, and people just cut all the foods and don't actually focus on including the good stuff. And I feel like plant-based eating can be the same. Surely you must see it done so poorly as well as done so well.
Yeah, I think because like plant-based is a very like a hype term at the moment, where it's very trendy, where we have to come back to like what the meaning of plant-based actually is and where it stems from. So, and then we've got the two avenues as well. There's people going plant-based for like the ethical and the environmental reasons, which we'd, or even vegan, which I am myself as well. But like in that space, like a vegan diet literally just means you don't include animal products. It doesn't say anything about what foods you are including. So I really like to focus more on, okay, what foods are we actually including rather than what we're excluding, because that will determine a lot more, like, are we actually meeting our nutritional requirements? Are we having a well-balanced and well-rounded diet from the foods that we've chosen to base our diet on and include on that daily basis?
Yeah, for sure. And like now you have this solid knowledge around it, right? But where did your health journey start, and where did your vegan journey start? Did you come in as informed as you are at this point now?
Absolutely not. So, well, where to start with this? So winding it right back to like, growing up, for example, always had like a great relationship with food. I'm from Switzerland, so like feel like this is much more of a European thing, where like we ate all our family meals together. We'd like most of the time we'd cook everything from scratch. Me and my sister were in the kitchen, like from basically as when we could walk, we'd be in the kitchen helping mom, like that kind of thing. Like it was actually a little bit of a shock coming to Australia that it wasn't normal for families to eat every single meal together at the table, like every single day. Like that was just normal for us. So like growing up, it was all really good. And then when I was 9, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that kind of threw my life upside down in terms of just not really as much having to change what I ate, but more like how I ate in terms of like carb counting and like planning out meals. And of course, it was like watching like sugar content and things like that, which because of how much like I'm a very perfectionist type A person. And when it was like all about like, controlling blood sugars and how much is this going to raise my blood sugar by, and counting carbs and counting dosing insulin, all of this stuff, like it led to me developing some really like rigid and disordered habits around eating, which then took me down the path of a full-blown eating disorder. Was hospitalized most of the time throughout high school, like a really, really rough relationship with food, where it kind of became all about like calories and eating as little as possible. And like a period of time, I'd like live off those sugar-free diet yogurts and like, really awful. And at the time I was swimming at quite a high level as well. So like my energy output would have been pretty high, but just not eating properly at all. And it really impacted my health very poorly. Throughout this time, I was already vegetarian, and this was like 100% for ethical reasons, didn't have anything to do with like weight or health or anything like that. It was just, I didn't want to eat animals. And then throughout my recovery, or during my recovery from an eating disorder, where I would say I wasn't anywhere near recovered, but I was kind of doing a little bit better, was when I decided to go vegan. And again, it was for ethical reasons, but the path that I initially took with it was rather disordered, because I got all of my information from, hadn't studied nutrition then yet, and I got all of my information from social media. And at the time, I don't know if you have come across this kind of stuff before, but it was all like Freely the banana girl, like people eating like basically just fruit and a little bit of like rice and potatoes, and like fat was the devil, and like all of this kind of stuff. And like, I just thought that that's how you had to eat to be a healthy vegan. And yeah, I was probably eating, definitely eating a very, very unbalanced, very inadequate vegan diet. Like hair was falling out in clumps, and like already being pretty malnourished from all of that history of an eating disorder, and still being very underweight. Like it was just not good. And I could see my health like declining with it. But at the same time, because I was so passionate from that ethical standpoint, I kind of refused to see it. And it was only through studying nutrition and through kind of coming to that realization that this isn't working, and starting to make those changes, like actually starting to have a well-balanced plant-based diet, and including way more fats and protein and calories overall, like that's when my health really started to improve. And I started to see, oh, this is what it looks like to actually feel good and to actually eat well.
Yeah, and there probably wasn't, like you said, there probably wasn't that much good information about plant-based
Absolutely
diets.
not. It was all like all the stuff that I was looking at anyway was all from, like those social media gurus, like, Freely the banana girl, and like YouTubers who'd like adopted the same. It was all like people going on like these cycling holidays to Chiang Mai in Thailand and eating like just fruit. Like it was, when you look back on it, you're like, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah. But then you're throwing in a second factor of diabetes around there as well. So you've got the plant-based stuff, the eating disorder history, and then diabetes. I feel like even the information in that space, there's been a lag with the catch-up, surely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Diabetes as well. Like it's a very mixed bag. Like I feel like in diabetes, there's often two camps. The one camp is just eat whatever you want and give insulin for it. And then the other camp is like eat low carb, but there's nothing kind of in between, where it's like, eat a well-balanced diet that's like, plant-based is awesome for diabetes. Like the fiber really helps with still being able to include plenty of carbohydrates and having stable blood sugars, because it doesn't just spike them up quickly and then bring them back down. So like, yeah, definitely a big sort of disconnect there.
So you've always been in the athletic space as well. You're saying you did swimming, I'm assuming, as a youngish age, teenage years. Yeah. And then sort of moved over into the CrossFit space as well, or And what pushed you sort of down into CrossFit?
Well, it's actually like kind of by accident in a way, because so I was doing swimming, throughout high school, and because my health declined so much, I ended up having to quit swimming. And then for a number of years during recovery, I basically did nothing other than like just, you're walking and a bit of yoga and that type of stuff. And then when I finished uni and my health was like on its way up, I was strong enough to start exercising again. Swimming again wasn't really an option, because there's just no like clubs except for like for kids kind of thing. So it was like, and I'm not the type of person, like I am a competitive kind of person, like with sport. I don't just want to, just exercise for fun. Like I want that side of it. So yeah, I ended up finding a strength and conditioning / CrossFit gym down here, and I just fell in love with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it progressed from there into a sense that you then are now a CrossFit coach as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you did your nutritionist degree, and then did you start consulting, or you worked in different spaces for a while to find what you wanted to do or nail in, or you always knew that sort of sports nutrition was going to be sort of your thing?
Yeah, I kind of always knew that. I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. Like as I was studying, I always thought I wanted to work in a hospital, more in the like diabetes space, actually, like in a children's hospital, definitely with kids, not with adults. Yeah. I don't have that kind of patience, even though now I am working with adults. I mean, like in a hospital setting, but yeah. It was actually because, like I told you off air before, like I'm really attached to Dunsborough where I live, and because it's a small town, there's no hospital. So it kind of like it was either work for yourself or stay in the city. And because I had built up a bit of a following on social media and people had expressed interest in working with me for nutrition, I thought, look, I'm going to give this a crack, just see if I can do it. Lots of like people, especially like family and everyone saying, no, you've got to go work like somewhere first for a few years and before you try doing your own thing, like it's not going to work. But it did. Yeah.
Yeah. And here you are. I know. Amazing. That's so good. So I feel like one of the biggest questions I get asked around the plant-based diet stuff is meeting your protein requirements, because, on a real simplistic level, and obviously your knowledge extends beyond this, but most people go, oh, well, that's plants. Plants don't contain a lot of protein. Meat is protein, and people think steak automatically in a sense. How do you overcome that? Where do you look for your protein, and do you struggle to meet your protein requirements?
Absolutely not. It's all about just knowing the right foods to include or to focus your meals around when you're eating plant-based. So yes, there are lots of plant-based foods like, your fruits and your vegetables, which don't contain barely any protein, a minuscule amount, but really not a lot. And also the important thing to be aware of is when we are like athletes or active individuals. So I call anyone who like trains with purpose and intention, like with the goal of improving and getting stronger and getting fitter, like you are an athlete, whether that's just like a hobby athlete or an elite professional athlete. So your protein requirements as an athlete are pretty much doubled than just your general person. So a general person, kind of 1 gram per kilo of body weight will meet your requirements just for health. But then for an athlete, that actually goes up to 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight. So say a 70 kilo female, your protein requirements kind of around 140 grams per day, which is a significant amount, pretty easy to meet when you're including, like chicken and meat. Those meals will easily get, 40, 50 grams of protein in a meal. However, plant-based, that's a lot more difficult, especially if you're not including those protein efficient foods in your diet. So even taking like beans and lentils as an example, which are generally considered protein sources on a plant-based diet, again, they contain protein and more than some other foods like fruit and vegetables, but it's still not a considerable amount of protein. So for example, like half a can of beans or chickpeas contains around 9 grams of protein. And if we're trying to get, 140 grams per day, it's a lot of beans that you have to eat.
And a lot of fiber to get through your system.
A lot of food volume. Yeah. So looking at more of like your soy-based foods are really good for protein. So thinking like tempeh and tofu, like the textured vegetable protein as a mince, or like edamame noodles, legume pastas. If you can tolerate it, like your wheat-based proteins, like a seitan can be a really good option. Protein powders, like in smoothies and things like a pea or a rice or a soy protein powder. Your plant-based milks, like a soy milk, is a really good option as well. And then also learning just to combine those foods. So for example, if you've got like a a bean dish? Can we add a little bit of tofu, a bit of edamame in there, or serve it with like a higher protein carbohydrate option, like a high protein bread or like a high protein grain, like a quinoa or something like that. And just working out, okay, what do my meals actually need to look like to kind of get that 30 gram, 40 gram protein in that meal?
Yeah, because that's awesome. I love that, because what I see from like someone who's not plant-based as well is they can often tend towards, even with animal proteins that might be reasonably high in protein, but then also really high in fat, or they're pairing it with something quite high in carbohydrates. They're actually getting full too quickly before they're getting enough of that protein in a sense. And I feel like in a plant-based diet, you would have to be conscious of the same thing, because if you are eating a large volume of plant foods, there's so much fiber. You'd be like, flip, I'm full when I haven't even started on my tofu yet.
And I work with a lot of plant-based athletes, and myself also, like, whose energy requirements are very high. So, you know, think around like needing like 3,000 calories a day or so. Like, it's difficult to meet that if you're eating 100% whole foods, which, like, of course, in an ideal world, I'd love to eat 100% whole foods, but sometimes it's just not possible. And you actually have to include the more quote unquote processed options, like say swapping from a whole grain to like a white rice or rice noodles, including some things like fruit juices and jams and, you know, some white toast and things like that, just to get the energy in, because not meeting energy requirements is actually really not good for our health. It's not just our performance and our energy levels, but it's things like our hormone function, our endocrine system, like our thyroid function. That's all then compromised if we then end up under fueling for our requirements. So that's really important when you're working in that plant-based athlete space, just because fiber, super filling.
Yeah. I don't know if this happened for you, but with me, when I went through my eating disorder, I used to track, like, I never thought about macros. This is like years ago when I was like under eating, over exercising, way too much CrossFit, burnt myself out, all that classic story. But I found I was just like 1,200 calories have to be underneath that, blah, blah, blah. Whereas like now, if I'm tracking, it's loosely tracking, but it's my mindset has changed so much, because it's like I have to hit over 2,200 calories. Like, I know that's my bare minimum requirements, and you start to shift that when you have that education around it. And I'm sure that must be for you as well, A, because you're exercising so much and you know you've got a high output, and B, you know when you're a busy person like yourself, you can tend to undereat quite quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And look, to be honest, ever since I went through my eating disorder, my hunger cues are just like they're just all over the place. So like I use tracking myself as a tool as well. Number one, because it really helps with diabetes management, to know like the carbohydrates and everything in my food. It helps me dose my insulin a lot more accurately. So it's really helpful from that regard. And then number two, just to make sure I'm eating enough, because if I didn't keep an eye on it, I would again just way undereat, just because again, plant foods, they're filling. I love my veggies, but I have to be really on top of it to make sure we actually get that energy target in.
How do you go, like, did you ever have digestive issues then? Because though, like, one of the biggest problems I see is like if someone's like presenting as plant-based, but then they're just struggling, like, so a lot of people struggling with a lot of the legumes or, you know, bean-based meals. Did it take you time to be able to tolerate the amount of fiber you're tolerating? Or
I think yes and no, like, because even growing up, like as a kid, like our family always included like lentils and tofu and lots of veggies and beans. So I feel like my digestive system was pretty used to those foods. And it was more actually just because of the years and years of like significantly under eating to allow my body to adjust to actually eating enough food. That was more of the issue. And of course, that came with a lot more fiber, a lot more FODMAPs. And then again, just being mindful of the food choices I was making. So not overdoing the fiber and also not overdoing the food volume. That's a really big one for me as well. So being mindful that I'm not like having giant salads and more, you know, having like a wrap or something instead.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I feel like, again, it's that education and awareness, because you can do lower FODMAPs while someone's sort of in a real severe dysbiosis state, or they've got really bad SIBO or something, and you can tolerate it and play with it. But ultimately, it's just a microbiome thing, right? Like your microbiome can take so long to adjust to even just different foods. Even adding in like a tiny bit of miso or something can be enough for someone who doesn't have a lot of soy-based foods to be like, I don't have the bacteria for that shit.
Definitely. Yeah. And for people with a background of disordered eating like I did, it's a lot that the actual digestive system itself is impacted by that. So just the motility is like a really slow transit time, which means that you have that delayed gastric emptying and you just stay full for a really long period of time, especially when it's then high fiber. So it's even like beyond microbiome, it's more just that digestive function just is not quite there. And it just takes a long time to strengthen that back up, like any muscle.
Yeah. And then I guess, the absorption of nutrients, and knowing that people, like when we've under-eaten for a long time and you don't have that zinc and you don't have those Bs and you can't produce enough stomach acid, it's that whole, you're not breaking down these foods properly, you're feeding, candida and bacteria overgrowth. And it's just a whole cyclic effect, really. So for you now, what are some of your favourite protein sources? Like what meals do you enjoy eating on a plant-based? Like what's some of your go-to stuff?
Yeah, so I really tofu is probably one of my favorite foods just because of how versatile it is. So I'll use it in I'll do like stir fries with like either rice or like rice noodles or soba noodles. That's one of my go-tos. I love like Mexican type of wraps or burrito bowls, and sushi bowls are really nice. I also love the pulse pasta, like the chickpea and lentil pastas, and just doing like a veggie-based sauce. Sometimes I put like lentils or like TVP in there. Also just love oats, like overnight oats and bircher, and, with like fruit and soy yogurt, sometimes a bit of protein powder. I'd say those are probably my like staple meals that I do like some variation of most of the time.
So how do you reckon that changes between because obviously it's the amount of food, like you list off all these foods and I go, oh yeah, my brain automatically goes, oh yeah, pre-post workout, they would be good meals. You're probably going, oats, you're going, there's carbs in there, I'm adding protein to it, doing that stuff. How does that change like performance-wise if you think of like your general person who's barely exercising to someone who's exercising a lot? Are you timing your fats and proteins around exercise, or how are you structuring your meals on a day-to-day?
Look, in terms of how it differs to someone who isn't exercising, it's more just the quantity of food in general. So carbohydrate requirements will be lower for someone who isn't doing exercise. Protein requirements will be lower, and overall calorie requirements will be lower. So, looking at the plate, that would be just a smaller amount of food potentially, and maybe more vegetables and less of the more energy dense parts of that meal. Or I might be adding like extra fats to the meal just to bump the calories up, and having more snacks. Like I have like at least 3 or 4 snacks a day, just to get the calories in. And I prefer that as opposed to having really big meals, again, just digestion wise. And then around timing, I always eat before training, and maybe like 30 minutes to an hour before I'll have like a more easy to digest sort of meal / larger snacks. So maybe like some toast with peanut butter and banana, or rice cakes or something like that. And then afterwards, I'd have a bit more of a filling meal with that protein and carbs and some veg or fruit in there.
So you must have, because you've got your nutrition quite dialed in now, tell me about the increases in your performance as your nutrition got better and more, like obviously you're eating more, but you're eating more protein. Yeah. Did you notice difference in your outputs, your strength, your times, all those kinds of things?
Massively, like absolutely no comparison. Like even if you look back at videos from me training like 4 years ago, like I'm like a lot heavier as well, just because I was very underweight when I first started. But even just like, obviously it's a combination of food and like muscle gain and weight gain, but like the food is what allowed that to happen. So yeah, it's no comparison. And that, like, even with my energy levels on like a day-to-day basis, that's why I have to be so on top of my food. It, like, if I undereat even just by a few hundred calories and I know that I need, like, I feel like The Walking Dead. Like, I feel like I've run 3 marathons. My energy is so low. And then actually eating enough, like I feel great. So it has such a big impact and on performance as well, like weights, how it feels, like times, like it makes such a difference. I can't emphasize that enough. And that's why I'm so passionate about it.
Yeah. Because I think it's really hard for people if your hunger cues aren't right. Like if you don't have good hunger cues, and often people say to me, I'm so tired in the afternoon. And I'm like, well, what have you eaten over the day? And then they kind of lay it out. I'm like, that's not actually a lot of food. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not hungry. But that's when you're right, tracking comes in really handy, because you can be like, hey, I've only had 50, 60 grams of carbs today and it's 3:00. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. And for me, it was also kind of unlearning how much I thought I needed in relation to how much I actually needed, because like even growing up like a swimmer where we would spend like 4 hours in the pool every day, like in comparison to that, I'm like, oh, but I'm not really doing that much. Surely I can't need that much food. But then also like, well, I'm so tired all the time. You have to at least give it a try and see if you feel better, and just kind of trust that process, and then see how much better you could feel when you do that. Like, I think sometimes we let fear, especially when it comes to like women and eating more, like fear of like weight gain or that is too much or whatever, like stop us from actually seeing how good we could feel. But sometimes we just need to commit to just making that change. For even if you do that commitment to like, okay, for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to try this and then see, do I feel better? Do I notice any difference?
Yeah, I love that. It's the small little things, like you said, like either starting to loosely track or add in a little bit more food, or for some people it's just simply eating breakfast. Like, you know, like it's those bits. If someone was thinking about going plant-based, where is a good starting point? What are some foods that are quite easy or enjoyable? Because some people also go gross. Like they've had one serve of tofu once and they're like, that is the most blandest, rubberish, whatever thing. I don't want to add that in. Where's a good, easy starting point to add some of those extra higher protein foods in?
I would actually focus on the meals that you currently eat and enjoy, and look at how you can make those plant-based. So for example, if like a staple meal that you love is, let's say, like bolognese pasta, can we do that with like TVP mince, or like swap the mince for like, crumbled tofu or something, and really make sure that you either keep the same spices and seasonings or actually like just add way more, because you're right, tofu is pretty bland. I don't mind eating it plain, but that's like me as like level whatever vegan. But if most people, like even buying those like satay pre-marinated versions to start with and using them in like sushi bowls and salads, definitely like potentially following some recipes at the start and not just trying to wing it. If you don't know how to cook those foods, you're not very familiar with them, I think that's a good place to start. And just making some simple swaps, like swapping the dairy milk to a soy milk, or, you know, swapping the, I don't know, cheese to a hummus or something, like making those little swaps to kind of your regular meals and taking it at the pace that you need to, rather than letting it get overwhelming.
Yeah, because that's the thing, isn't it? When we go cold turkey and then we're just like, oh, actually, I don't even know what I'm eating now. And then people resort to just eating fruit and veg or carrot sticks or whatever. And then they feel crap and they're like, well, this is no longer fun. And then compliance goes out the window. Whereas you're right, if you slowly like switch 1 or 2 meals, or say it's breakfast each week and you're having scrambled tofu or something, can you slowly or start making desserts, you know, with silken tofu or something? It is a way nicer transition. And then, like you said, you're getting those protein requirements in, because that is probably the number one thing I see where people are just under eating as food.
And my philosophy when swapping to a plant-based diet is replace, not remove. So any food that you're removing, we've got to replace it, and then with that we've got to replace it with like a nutritionally similar equivalent. So, you know, not just like, you know, your pulled beef tacos doing like jackfruit tacos instead. Like it's not going to be an equivalent. Or like swapping Greek yogurt to coconut yogurt. Like when we're going to miss out that calcium, that protein. So we need to make sure we are choosing nutritionally, they won't be the same, but similar equivalents.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's super helpful, and that's so good, because like you said, like a lot of people don't realize that, or don't think of what they're getting nutritionally wise out of, you know, some of those animal-based products as well. Yeah,
even like if you go to a restaurant and you order a plant-based dish, like most of the time it's all like cauliflower instead of meat and jackfruit instead of meat, or like vegetables. It's like, I have no protein in this meal. Yeah.
And like you said, like, and then sourcing good quality protein, because you can also buy poor quality, I want to say shit tempeh or tofu or whatever, that's, maybe not A, taste-wise that great, or B, you're thinking the same as when you're buying meat. Like obviously your organic meat or your grass-fed meat or whatever, the way it's processed, the quality of it is still going to be better than other versions of it. So there must be that variance across the board with plant-based products as well.
Yeah, it's more that, like, I think we're pretty lucky in Australia. Like the quality of like the tofu and the tempeh is pretty good in my opinion. Some of the meat alternatives though, it's just again being aware that they're not like all in the same box. Like some are not great sources of protein. Some are more like your sometimes treat foods rather than like an everyday food, or like, even say like there's certain meat replacements that are more just like coconut oil and a bit of starch, which like, again, if you want that for a family barbecue here and there, totally fine, but it's not something that I'd be having every single day just because it's not going to be a very nutritious and protein rich option.
Yeah, and it goes the same with the milks and stuff. Like you're thinking soy milks and some with like some of the vegetable oils or canola oils or things in them, and you're like, oh, okay, don't really want to be adding that into my body.
It's more like those organics, the nut milks, like whilst they sound great, they probably taste great, a lot of them just aren't calcium fortified because of that, organic label. And making sure that, like, my favorite brand is the Vita Soy. They have really good quality, or the Pure Harvest as well. Like they're all fortified with calcium. So you've got your different, whether you like your oat or your soy or whatever milk, and they're really good options just so we're actually getting that calcium that we're removing when we're not having dairy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're right, like the market's expanded and shifting so much as well.
Absolutely,
like
so much. I feel like every week there's new stuff out.
And then you go to Bali and like Canggu is just loaded with insane vegan restaurants. Like there are so many good ones. Like even if you're not classing yourself as vegan or plant-based, you would go to them just because the food is so good. Like, and you don't even feel like you're missing anything. Well, thank you. That was awesome. For those who want to learn more, want recipe inspiration, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, just my Instagram. So my Instagram handle is naturally_Nina_. And then I also have a website that I neglect a little bit, but that's naturally-nina.com.
Awesome. I will link those all in the show notes for you guys listening as well, so that you can go and be inspired. And just follow Nina's journey and go and learn some stuff, because I do feel like it is such an important topic. And even if you don't want to go 100% plant-based, adding in more plant, dense sources of protein is always going to be a good option, a good starting point as well. So Thank you for jumping on today. And we hopefully will chat again soon.
Absolutely.